That's grand. Thank you, Kane. So good evening, everyone. As Kane has just said, my name is Carolyn Patterson and I'm Dry Stock Advisor in the Ballyface Order office. And I'm very glad you could join us tonight for our talks. So let's get started. Move on, Kane. What is BPS? Well, it's a basic payment scheme. It's the form you fill in each year in springtime. It can be referred to the check in the post or now money in the bank, and still quite often referred to as the old area aid form by farmers. And some farmers class it the most important form of the year, and it pretty much is. So what makes land eligible? So 1 eligible hectare of land declared equals 1 BPS entitlement activated for payment purposes. So in order to get your BPS payment, you must have an eligible hectare for each entitlement. And the two key principles in relation to the eligibility of land is the parcel must be available to the farmer on the 31st of May. And this means having land made at the beginning of the year till after the 31st of May or before the 31st of May to the end of the year. And just to remember, for ANC, BDGP and glass schemes, land must be farmed for the full year. In order to be eligible for payment, you must be carrying out an agricultural activity on agricultural area, and there must be evidence of that agricultural activity on the parcel. This entails maintaining farmland suitable for grazing or cultivation without preparatory action going beyond usual agricultural methods and machineries to prepare it to produce arable crops, vegetables, nurseries, grass, and keep animals. So if you need a bulldozer to prepare the land, it's not a normal method of preparing ground, therefore it makes it ineligible. There's some additional requirements, like having independent and suitable access to all parcels. So you can't use your neighbour's land to get to yours. And each parcel should have an easily recognisable external boundary, something to indicate where the field ends. And this is except in the case of commonage. Also, you should have appropriate stock-proof fencing. That means your animals can't make their way across to the neighbours and vice versa. And that would mean sheep require sheep fencing. And the only land that doesn't require fencing is exclusively owned hill land. As always, you must comply with cross-compliance. So what is eligible land? I'm going to show you a few photos now of examples of eligible land. And in this photo, you will notice that it has appropriate stock-proof fencing, sheep fencing, because you can see sheep and cattle in the field. And the rushes are being kept under control. And the land looks green, clean, and grazed. So it's eligible. Next photo shows eligible land also, and you can see sheep grazing the land, and there is some rushes, but they're being kept under control. Except now, if you look into the background of that photograph, you may notice that there is a considerable amount of rock on the hill, and so therefore you would expect it to make deductions for that. But on a whole, it's still green and grazed. So this is also eligible land, and this is tillage land that's being harvested. And now that I've mentioned tillage, we will maybe just cover a small slide on greening. So what is greening? Well, to be clear, and as a dead giveaway in red writing, greening only affects tillage farmers. So basically, grass-only dairy and dry stock farmers meet the greening requirements without having to do anything. Over 90% of farmers will automatically qualify for the greening payment on the basis of how they are farming already, so no changes need to be made. Greening makes up part of your entitlement payment, actually 44% of it. However, for tillage farmers, there are some requirements to be met, and it's advised you discuss it with your advisor or consultant if you need help. Another lovely photo of more natural grassland, and you can see it's obviously being maintained. And again, it's green. Another photo of open mountain upland. And just to note in regard to this, generally the only way of keeping such land eligible is by grazing it with enough sheep or maybe even suitable cattle, if your mountain or upland is suitable for them. And just be aware, if your ground happens to be SAC or SPA nature land, you just need to check with your local MPWS ranger that you're allowed to graze cattle on it. And if maybe cattle has never been traditionally grazed on it before. Again, another eligible upland commonage photo, and you can see it being grazed and maintained. But there is a little bit of rock on it, so you may have to make some deductions for that. Another photo, and this is eligible forestry. You can see it in the background there of the photo. And what is eligible forestry? Well, it's a land that was claimed on an SPS application in 2008, which then returned a payment and subsequently planted under forestry scheme. And now you can claim your entitlements on forestry land. You also notice in the picture there is some round bales, and for them round bales, the land would need to be deducted where they're standing. Moving on to landscape features. Landscape features in BPS is a good hedgerow and a drain. And these were designated as landscape features in 2009 by Ireland. And which means that on these areas under, which means that the areas under these features is eligible for payment. However, it's important to be aware that destination means they cannot be removed. And if you had to remove them for any reason, like farmyard expansion, where there's no other option other than to remove it, a replacement hedge of similar length must be planted in advance of the removal. And the same goes for drains. Do not remove hedge or drain until replacement is done. So no hedge should be removed during the bird nesting season, which is the 1st of March to the end of August. Hedges planted under glass or for an agro-environmental scheme cannot be used to replace landscape features. And hedges must be stopped from encroaching on the land, otherwise they can no longer be considered eligible for payment, and you would lose out on the landscape feature. Just to be aware, there's an environmental impact assessment regulation brought in 2011, which requires you to apply for screening, basically seeking approval from the Department of Agriculture for removal of more than 500 metres of hedge. So if it's less than 500 metres, you don't need to apply for screening. Where you propose to remove a hedgerow that separates two fields, if the area of the two fields plus the area of hedge exceeds 5 hectares, you must apply for screening also. And where drains are fenced as required on an environmental scheme such as glass, the area between the drain and the fence continues to be eligible. Hedgerows and drains must be retained and maintained, so you have to prevent encroachment and wetland. So what makes land ineligible? Well, non-agricultural areas are not eligible, such as exclusively sport fields, golf courses, pitch and put courses, horse riding arenas, fenced off horse racing facilities, amenity areas are around the house. Also, bogland unfit to be grazed, land on the forestry which was planted in 2008 or earlier, or forestry land not getting a premium. Land with scrub, land with uncontrolled rushes, land with mature and woody heather. The list goes on. Land with ferns and no grass, areas of bare rock, areas ungrazed due to low stocking rates, inaccessible areas, land is not being maintained suitable for grazing or cultivation, areas used for commercial turf production, and any areas ungrazable ground cover. Basically, there's a long list. So some photos just to show you some of these. Photo in the picture shows ineligible bogland, which is covered heavily with white dead grass and scrub, and it's unfit to be grazed. And this photo shows rushes, and rushes on a lot of farms in Ireland. And you can see that the man in the picture is 6'5", I believe. And you can see the rushes are nearly the height of him. And these rushes haven't been controlled, so they're taking over. So where rushes are tall and dense and can't be grazed by animals, the land area needs to be deducted. It may cause only a small area needs to be deducted or a percentage reduction across a larger area. So why lose land to rushes when they can be controlled? But it can take some effort. And once grazed, rushes are eligible, if kept grazed as well. This photo shows This photo shows rushes that need ongoing management, so you can keep them down by grazing animals or by mowing and topping. But if left to their own devices, will soon enough become ineligible down the road. And this photo now shows rushes that have been well controlled. You see the immature rushes are edible and can be kept under control by grazing stock. So really when rushes are grazed, land is kept eligible. And heather can be another issue. So this photo shows low and mature heather, which is grazed by mountain sheep in particular, but other sheep and cattle can graze it where it occurs at lower levels. And land with heather like this is still eligible, but requires management to keep it eligible under existing guidelines. Grazing is the easiest form of management. Obviously, that needs to be in line with common management plans and GLAS or the lands, or if the land happens to be under SAC or SPA land. This photo shows an example of what wouldn't be eligible. Tall, woody heather not being grazed by animals. And you would either lose a whole parcel or you could end up using percentage reduction across the area, depending how much of it is. Again, when heather is grazed, land is kept eligible. And this is a photo of ferns. And ferns are bracken or inedible. They emerge annually in early summer and start to die off when the first frosts arrive in autumn. When ferns have grass underneath, it will result in land being grazable and therefore eligible. This photo shows summer view of sheep actively grazing grassland with ferns. This photo shows the autumn view of sheep grazing, and there's a lot of grass cover. And again, this is a winter view, and you can see there is a lot of grass cover. So the only land ineligible with ferns on is when there's no grass underneath. Therefore, it's not grazable by animals, and it must be deducted in full. This photo shows areas of bare rock. The area on the rock is not eligible, as it's obviously not available for grazing. So rocky areas with no grazing must be deducted. But where there is a lot of grass and rock together, only a percentage reduction needs to be applied. Another big issue in Ireland is scrub. And this photo shows an area under dense scrub with no grazing, so it must be deducted and 100% ineligible. And just to note, scrub cannot be removed during the period of 1st of March to 31st of August, bird nesting season, just like hedges. In addition, farmers must also comply with the department's environmental impact assessment regulations, as mentioned before under the hedge removal. So if you are removing over 5 hectares of scrub, you would more likely use mechanical clearance of the scrub, and as such, the proposed works could include ploughing, harrowing, fertilizer use, sowing, seed, and clearing the vegetation. And therefore, this would be classed as significantly increasing the agricultural productivity on uncultivated land or semi-natural area falling under the EIA regulations we mentioned. Basically, you're improving the land to be more productive. And as always, if the land is designated as either SAC or SPA, you need to talk to your local MPWS ranger before starting any work. But at the very least, talk to your advisor or consultant before undertaking such jobs. This picture shows hedgerow, which is no longer eligible as a landscape feature as it hasn't been kept cut back. And once it's cut back, it will become eligible again. It's heading towards scrub territory. Another picture shows an area with a small amount of scrub and a good bit of grazing. So there'd only be a percentage deduction for the scrub. And you can see in this picture there is encroachment of winds. And these winds would need to be cut back to avoid them taking over, or before an even bigger area would need to be deducted. And I know it's great shelter for ewes and lambs, but it needs to be kept under control. Another picture here is abandoned land. And this land, which is agricultural area, but however, it's very evident that no agricultural activity is happening on it. Evidence of this abandonment is where no animal tracks can be seen anywhere in the field or around drinking points or gates. You'll notice hedges growing in, especially around entrances to fields, and the grass is growing over the bottom bar of the gate that would be used for access. And we've all, unfortunately, seen fields like this. It's not maintained in a suitable grazing and cultivation state and requires a lot of work to bring it back. This land can be made eligible if grazed and farmed again. Come on to another topic, burning. And this photo shows the devastation that burning can do to the land, not forgetting the effect it would have had on wildlife and people's lives, especially if it's not a controlled burn. And even then, things can go wrong. So the only type of burning that is allowed is a controlled burn. So what is controlled burning? It's burning that is carried out through proper channels and meets all relevant environmental requirements and any other lawful requirements, especially if you are within 1 mile of forestry, like notifying the guards 7 to 35 days in advance and the local fire service before carrying out any burning. Also, you should discuss your intentions with your insurance company to ensure you're covered if things go wrong. There are many more specific requirements covered in an information document that should be read before you even consider burning. Prescribed burning code of practice developed by the Department of Agriculture and the Forest Service. But slightly more planning is needed in the case of natural land, SIC and SPA land, and prior approval must be obtained from MPWS, so you need to talk to your local MPWS ranger long before you even consider burning. And let's be clear here, burning is dangerous, and all eventualities, as far as possible, need to be planned for and shouldn't be carried out without due respect. But the point I'm specifically making concerning your BPS application is where land has been burnt, it is no longer suitable for grazing or cultivation and therefore is not eligible for BPS payment. And if your land's burnt and you happen to burn your neighbours, well, I don't think he or she is going to be too pleased with you when they realise they've lost their payment as well. So we're moving on now to areas require total exclusion from your BPS application, and you can see there a cattle shed which would require total exclusion. Again, farmyards, buildings and concreted areas all require total exclusion. Gravelled hard stand areas like this on farms that would be used for storing bales, and they need to be excluded. Farm roadways, and only the farm roadway in the picture would require exclusion. There is grass otherwise there. Ponds, streams, rivers and lakes, and they are natural features and therefore deductions must be made for them also. An eligible marshy area covered with scrub. And you can see this is quite marshy and wet and it's not fit to be grazed. So it definitely needs to be excluded. As well as that, areas fenced off to exclude livestock, obviously not being grazed or maintained. Areas with solar panels on them and access roads. And we're getting a lot more, you'll see a lot more solar panels now popping up in places. Unused areas in arable fields and areas under quarries, sand and gravel pits. So that's land eligibility covered, which is the basis of your BPS application, but we're completing now the BPS application. So at this stage, you should have received your maps in the post from the Department of Agriculture. So we're going to check the following are correct. So all land farmed is declared. Parcels no longer farmed are deleted. Parcel boundaries are correct on the maps, and all ineligible areas have been excluded or redlined correctly. So when completing your BPS form, we use the land parcel identification system. How? Well, it is a computer database which contains a record of the lands declared each year on your BPS form. The maps you get from the department contain land parcels which have a unique identification number known as a LIPIS number. And it is important that your LIPIS or your land parcel is correct to ensure that there's no risk of an overclaim penalty. And then eligible areas, where when As you mentioned, when you get your maps from the department, you should check to ensure that all ineligible areas have been redlined and therefore should be deducted. And what I mean by redlined is all ineligible areas, as we previously described in slides, have been drawn around with a red line on the map, and the area inside has been fully deducted, like a farmyard, or partially deducted depending on how much of the area is ineligible, e.g. could be scrub. And you'll just like the photo above where you can see areas of scrub have been redlined. And if you remove these ineligible areas, the land becomes, if you remove the scrub in these ineligible areas, the land can become claimable again into the future. And honestly, there's quite a few things to redline for. Also, there's a pro rata system called the reduction coefficient procedure used to determine the payable area of parcels where areas with reductions exist within the parcels as in the photo. The system is applied by the department to determine the payable area for each parcel being claimed. And something to note that if a parcel is 70% or more ineligible land, like scrub or bare rock, etc., the whole parcel is classed ineligible under the department's regulation. So you get 0 hectares for the parcel. And if you want more info on this, talk to your advisor or your consultant. So just to be aware, to get paid under other schemes like ANC, GLASS, BDGP, Organic Farming Scheme, continuous participation in the Young Farmer Scheme, Protein Aid Scheme, and now a Euro Straw Incorporation Scheme for tillage farmers, you must make a BPS application each year. But separate applications for these schemes may also be required. So we're moving on to my take-home messages. It's important to take time to look at the BPS maps. Walk your farm, identify ineligible areas, e.g. scrub encroachment that has maybe got worse since last year, and especially if you know changes have happened on farm. Always check your maps and recheck them for any changes or anything missing. Only declare eligible areas of land in your 2021 BPS application. And this is to avoid inspections and penalties to your payment. On your BPS farm, include all land on your farm, whether owned, rented in, leased in, land and forestry. As always, it's an online application on AgFood by yourself or by your advisor or consultant. And if you completed your own application, ensure to tick the ANC box, which Paul will allude to in his presentation after me. Also, you can tick a no land change box, but be sure that there are no changes. So, BPS is now open to do applications. Closing date for the application is the 17th of May 2021. Amendments are allowed up to the 31st of May. And as always, it's advised you should read the terms and conditions for your BPS 2021. This is only a snapshot of what's happening, and as always, consult your advisor or consultant in good time, especially if changes are needed. So I'd like to thank you all for joining me tonight, and now Paul will take over with his talk. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Caroline. That's great. We'll move straight on to Paul. So Paul, if you want to share your screen, and just to remind the good crowd that's logged in tonight, that again, if you have any questions or queries or comments on any of the presentations here over the course of the evening, to send them in using the question and answer function at the bottom of your screen, and I'll put it to the panel before we finish. Paul, you can go ahead. Thank you.
And has that come up there, Cian?
Yeah, looks perfect. Thank you very much, Paul.
Yeah, thanks, Cian, and thanks for the introduction. I am going to take up where Carolyn has left off, and I'm going to deal with the ancillary schemes that she mentioned in her last slide and ancillary forms that are linked to the BPS application. So the topics I'll cover are the Area of Natural Constraint, or ANC scheme, the pros and cons of long-term land leasing at the minute from both the lessor and the lessee's perspectives, the 8 different types of transfer of entitlements, the Young Farmer Scheme or YFS, the 2 types of National Reserve applications, and finally the recently announced opening of the Organic Farming Scheme or the OFS. So the ANC scheme, what am I referring to here? Down the years, it has been known as area aid payment, headage payment, compensatory allowance payment, or disadvantaged area scheme payment. Basically, we'll be familiar with it from the point of view that it's the first payment we receive in the calendar year, generally in September, and there's always a fairly big hole for it to fill. So Carolyn mentioned it there earlier. It's very important that we tick the box on this application. The BPS online system, if we are eligible for ANC and received it last year, it won't allow us to go onto the second page without ticking the box. Or if we don't tick it, this message that you probably can't read comes up, which basically tells us we were eligible and received ANC in the previous year. Are you sure you want to proceed without ticking the box? So at this stage, you will tick the box. My advice on this would be, even if you don't intend to have any stock for the calendar year this year, still tick the box. You don't know what will happen in the future. Things can change, plans can change. Right, so for land to be eligible under the ANC scheme, you must have the land for the calendar year, saying that the traditional 11-month con-acre agreement is completely acceptable. You need a minimum of 3 hectares to account for this scheme, and you need to meet 2 criteria for the stocking rate. First one is you have to have a minimum of 0.15 livestock units per hectare for 7 consecutive months in the calendar year, and you need to average 0.15 livestock units per hectare for the whole of the 2021 calendar year. So in effect, what that means is you're looking at 0.15 livestock units for the year if you have stock all year round per hectare. If you only have stock for 7 consecutive months of the year, you're looking at just shy of twice that. So you're looking at about 0.3 livestock units per hectare. So when I say a livestock unit, what is a livestock unit? Well, bovines, cattle less than 2-year-old, are 0.6 of a livestock unit. From the date a calf is born to the day before it becomes 2-year-old is 0.6, and any bovine over 2-year-old is a full livestock unit. Sheep and goats both count for 0.15 livestock units per hectare. Donkeys are a livestock unit, and horses are a full livestock unit. So how do the Department of Agriculture calculate these livestock units? If you have cattle on the land, they will calculate them through the Animal and Identification Movement database. You notify them when you buy an animal, sell an animal, or register a calf's birth. So they will calculate it automatically. You don't need to do anything. And as soon as you've met the minimum stocking rate, you'll be paid. From a sheep or goat perspective, you need to submit your valid sheep or goat census by the due date, which is generally before the 1st of February gone. You may need to submit original register, flock register and dispatch dockets if you're only sheep farming for the last year or so, was a new entrant into farming. Once you're established over a couple of years, the department will use the census to calculate your stocking rate. Donkeys, as of 2020, the regulations on donkeys changed, and they can now only account for up to 50% of your livestock. You have to have a passport in your name, and the donkey has to be owned. And for horses is a little bit more complex. You have to have what's known as a breeding enterprise. So you have to be registered with your local district veterinary office as a horse premises. You have to have the passports in your own name. You can submit the original passports after the 31st of July, because at that stage you've satisfied the 7 consecutive months of the calendar year, assuming you've had the animals on the land since the 1st of January. But to qualify as a breeding enterprise here, you have to have bred a foal in 2019 or 2020. If you tick either of those boxes in 19 or 20, the mares will count that foaled in those years, and all equines aged between 1 and 5 years of age will count as a full livestock unit. So that's ANC. Now a little bit on long-term land leasing. Things are a little bit up in the air at the minute. The end of December 2020, we finished the last cap. More than likely, the 1st of January 2023, we will begin the next cap, subject to negotiations. So at the minute, we are kind of in no man's land for 2021 and 2022. We're in what's known as a transitional period or transitional arrangements until the new cap kicks in. So the way I will start this bit of the presentation is a very good quote I heard from the department inspector recently. And it was alluding to what you might hear or read over the next year or year and a half. And the statement is, nothing is decided until everything is decided. So while you might hear reports that certain elements have been decided, they have not been decided until the whole thing is signed off. So anyway, looking at this from a lessor's point of view, that is the landowner, given the uncertainty, given the possible risk of losing entitlements to the National Reserve over the next couple of years, the uncertainty regarding definition of an active farmer, etc. I suppose a couple of questions maybe you need to ask yourself. Is this the ideal year to get into a long-term lease? Can you possibly continue farming for another year or two? In a year's time, we will be hopeful that we will have a better idea of what's coming in the next cap. And definitely in 2 years' time, you will have established your new entitlements under the next cap, which should give you a better chance of safeguarding them into the future. If this is not possible for whatever reason, maybe consider a short-term rental agreement for the next 12 months. And again, as I said, hopefully things might be a little bit clearer by this time next year. From both parties' perspectives, the rent must offer a return to both parties in order for it to be sustainable. This is a medium to long-term lease, and it needs to be sustainable for both parties. Obviously, there are very attractive income tax incentives for any leases over 5 years. For these to qualify, you need to make sure whoever's acting on your behalf has them stamped by revenue and that they are registered within 30 days of stamping with the Property Services Regulatory Authority. That is on www.psr.ie. As always, this is a massive decision. It's akin to changing enterprise or selling land or going into forestry. It's a massive decision. It's something you want to put a bit of time into, discuss with family, and of equal importance, discuss it with the professionals. Seek legal advice, seek taxation advice from a tax consultant or accountant prior to signing. Again, from the lessee's perspective, again, I will reiterate, nothing is decided until everything is decided. I suppose the big thing here is on the lease, maybe to ensure that there is a separate land rental value and a separate entitlement value incorporated into the lease. It leads to more transparency. You know what you're paying for the land, you know what you're paying for the entitlements that you're renting. In order for the lease to qualify for this tax relief, you cannot be an immediate family member, so it cannot be father to son or father to daughter. And again, from the leasee's perspective, rent must offer a return to both parties to be sustainable. So put plenty of research into it and simply do the maths. Take out the calculator and do the maths. And of equal importance for the lessee as the lessor, seek legal and taxation advice prior to signing anything. So transfer of entitlements, as with most schemes or forms we're talking about tonight, deadline is the 17th of May. It's an online application only through AgFood, either your own individual AgFood account or through your agent. For those that had entered into lease of entitlements, lease reversion notifications for 2021 went up about 10 days ago, and they are in your 2020 correspondence. So it's important to either go into that or get your agent to go into that to make sure that any lapsed leases of entitlements is noted and renewed if applicable. As has been the case every year since BPS came into existence, there is a 20% clawback on the sale of entitlements without land. So just to make sure that you're aware of that. Any change to the herd number usually will involve the transfer of entitlements form. The exceptions to this would be where you are maybe changing something as simple as changing the address on the herd number. You don't need a transfer of entitlements. And if you are changing maybe a maiden name to a married name, you don't need a transfer of entitlements. Basically, anything that affects a PPS number needs a transfer of entitlements form. So transfer, be very aware, it's a two-stage process. It's incomplete until it's accepted by the transferee. So you or your agent creates a transfer key, and then the transfer key is sent to the transferee. But until they accept it on the system, that application has not gone into the Department of Agriculture and is not a valid application. It's important that we're aware of that. The different types of transfers then, we have sale of entitlements with or without land. We have leases with the input or without the input of an auctioneer. We have the gift of entitlements. Obviously, it avoids the clawback scenario, but beware that there can be capital gains tax implications on this. So again, get advice from a taxation professional. Inheritance, and that will on all wills, unless the entitlements are specified to go in a particular direction, the entitlements now will always go with the land, as I said, unless specified. Scission of entitlements refers to the splitting of a holding. Merger, as it suggests, is the combination of two or more holdings. Change of a legal entity, maybe where a sole trader forms a company with someone else or a joint venture. And change of registration details, maybe where a husband or wife are added onto the existing spouse's herd number. So a couple of things to be aware of, or problems the department have come across with transfer of entitlements. The first one is the two trade rule. This is put in place to avoid, I suppose, speculation on entitlements. It's to avoid treating them like a stock or a share, where you might buy an entitlement for €1 and sell it for 110, which is completely against the terms of the BPS. Two trades are allowed in certain scenarios. So where you change registration on a herd number, you can then go and lease them out. Equally, if you inherited entitlements, you can lease them out or sell them if you want. If you're uncertain about it, you can send the details to the transfer of entitlements at agriculture.gov.ie, email them with the details, and they'll get back to you fairly promptly. But bear in mind that needs to be done sooner rather than later, as the deadline for this, as was mentioned earlier, is the 17th of May. So failure to apply or apply on time is another issue. Forms going up that are unsigned or unwitnessed. Additional documentation may be missing. Failure to accept the transfer by the transferee. As I mentioned, the application is not complete until it has been accepted, and it hasn't gone to the department until it's been accepted. Another issue that crops up now and again, the herd keeper cannot transfer entitlements. The herd keeper can only deal in livestock on the land. They cannot put in any applications or anything to do with any scheme payments. And land parcels missing when selling with land. So when you're selling with land, you're selling entitlements with land, you will obviously avoid the 20% clawback, but the land parcels have to be included, A, in the application to transfer entitlements, and B, obviously in the purchaser's BPS. If they are missing from either or both of these, it's an ineligible application. Now on to the National Reserve. Again, deadline 17th of May. Again, a food online application only. So paperwork involved here for an individual herd owner, which most of us are. We're looking at the educational cert or letter of equivalence, details of off-farm income, which I'll get to later on, and a marriage cert if there's a discrepancy between any of these documents. For multiple herds or multiple ventures, the required documents include the above that I mentioned earlier. Long birth cert confirming date of birth, a scheme declaration confirming that the young farmer is involved in the day-to-day running of the farm, confirmation that the bank account is either in the young farmer's name or in joint names, and confirmation in the case of company applications that the young farmer is a director and at least a 20% shareholder of the company. So there are two types of applications under the National Reserve. They are the young farmer application and the new entrant category. The young farmer category, you can be no more than 40 during the calendar year of the first application under BPS. You have your agricultural feedback level 6 by the 17th of May 2021. List of all approved or acceptable qualifications is under the terms and conditions on Appendix A. You obviously submit a 2021 BPS application as, again, very importantly, herd owner, not herd keeper. You're set up in the last 5 years, and your off-farm income in 2019 or 2020 is less than 40,000. You can pick either year, whichever is most advantageous to you. So for the new entrant category then, first three are very similar. Qualification, BPS as herd owner, less than 40,000 off-farm income in 19 or 20. Where it differs then, you have to have set up the holding in either 2019, 2020 or 21. No agricultural activity can have taken place in the 5 years preceding the present agricultural activity. And the advantage of this one is that there is no upper age limit, unlike the young farmers one. So what do you get out of that if you are successful? You get a top up of your existing entitlements to the national average. National average is somewhere in or around 260. So if you have entitlements worth 200, they'll be brought up to 260. So you'll gain €60 per entitlement. Where you have land submitted in your BPS application this year with no entitlements on it, you will get entitlements from the National Reserve at the national average of 260 for each eligible hectare without an entitlement. Where you get a top-up on owned or leased entitlements, both are eligible for top-ups, but the leased entitlements will only attract the top-up for the duration of the lease. And once the entitlements revert back to the owner, the money from that will go back to the National Reserve. A bit of a difference, is quite important difference in the National Reserve application this year. Number of allocations stroke top-ups will be dependent on the number stroke value of applications received. So they're saying here that it is possible, or maybe there's an expectation that it could be oversubscribed and that you may not get a top-up or an allocation for every hectare you submit. National Reserve entitlements can be traded the year after allocation. And finally, on this area, we have the Young Farmer Scheme. I've split this into existing participants and new participants. So for existing participants, tick the YFS box if available on your 2021 BPS form. Double check if the YFS box is not available. This doesn't necessarily mean that you're not eligible for it. It just means there could be a computer glitch with the department system. They have told us that people that were inspected last year, there's the possibility that the box is not appearing on your system for 2021 application. So it's very important. This is your application. You need to make sure it's correct. So go back over your records for the last 5 years. If you've received 5 years Young Farmer Scheme top up to and including 2020, then the box shouldn't be there. You're not eligible for another year's payment. But if you've received anything less than 5 years, you probably are eligible for a payment. And if this is the scenario, you need to put in a new YFS application on the online system. Inspections are increased for 2020, which will occur in 2021, from 5% to 10%. Young farmers, they will need to show financial control through accounts and dockets from merchants, vets, etc. in their name. And what was catching out a number of inspector participants up to date is need to be able to show full knowledge of the day-to-day management of the enterprise. Seems fairly basic, but the department, it's the reason inspections went from 5 to 10%. The department have come across an alarming number of young trained farmers who mightn't have had the correct answers for some of these questions. So the benefits, the payments, top up of 25% of the national average, up to 50 entitlements. So in 2020, that was €68 of a top up per hectare, maximum of 50 entitlements or hectares. So it was worth 3,400 maximum payment per annum. And if you were lucky enough to qualify for that for the 5 years, you could get a top up of 17,000 under the Young Farmer Scheme. So well worth doing a bit of research to make sure that your name is, or your box wasn't missing from the application. For new applications, again, deadline through Ag Food, 17th of May. Again, no more than 40 during the calendar year of first application under BPS. VTAC level 6 to be uploaded. Submit a 2021 BPS application. Activate entitlements. You can only have set up the holding in the last 5 years. And unlike the National Reserve, there is no off-farm income threshold. Finally, the Organic Farming Scheme, as I mentioned, was opened in the last 2 weeks. Application started again online through Ag Food on the 1st of March and will close on the 30th of April. It's a €4 million budget. The department are expecting that to enable somewhere between 400 and 500 farmers to join the scheme. Ranking and selection will kick in if it's oversubscribed. For those of you that have applied for TAMs over the last couple of years, you'll be familiar with that, and indeed lost beforehand. The ranking and selection. The criteria that will be used are the people that will have priority under this ranking and selection if it's put in place will be applicants who applied in 2018 but were rejected because of ranking and selection and not enough money to go around. Dairy farmers, tillage farmers, horticulture farmers will get priority. Young farmers will get priority, that is under 40. And people who convert the whole of their holding as opposed to partial conversion will get more points. If you are accepted into the scheme, it's expected you'll be notified sometime around October or November of this year, and you have until the 1st of April next year then to complete your 25-hour organic course and upload the cert. Just be aware if you are applying, there's a dual funding issue, especially with loss under low input permanent pasture and traditional hay meadow. So get the advice of your consultant or Teagasc advisor before putting in an application. The procedure, you apply to the certification body, that is the Irish Organic Association or the Organic Trust. Quite an onerous task, so don't leave it too long as there's a lot of documentation needed. Once they receive the application on their desk, they contact the department, the organic section down in Johnstown Castle, and the organic section release the organic OFS tab onto your ag food system, at which stage you can apply for the OFS. Again, as I said, 30th of April is the deadline for that. So final thoughts, hopefully I have not left you with more questions than answers. Basically, take home messages, deadline 17th of May for everything with the exception of the OFS. Tick boxes as necessary and double check and treble check if necessary. Read all relevant terms and conditions. This period and forms is worth thousands, if not tens of thousands to you, so it's very important to get it right. Don't be afraid to ask questions of the Department of Agriculture, your Teagasc advisor, private consultant, auctioneers, accountant, and or solicitors as necessary. Any queries relating to transfer of entitlements, you can email this address, National Reserve or Young Farmer Scheme this address. And finally, for those people in Gloss who have traditional farm buildings, there are a very small number of places, probably 70 to 80 places coming available for the grant scheme that comes out every year from the Heritage Council. If you're interested in that, it's an online process again. The Heritage Council are organising a webinar on the 11th of March, which is this Thursday at 12 p.m. And if you want to book a place, send an email to ameenan@heritagecouncil.ie. And that is me. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thanks very much, Paul. That's great. If you want to stop sharing your screen there, and I'll ask Caroline to come back on the screen as well. Caroline, if you can turn on your camera there, that's great. Can you hear me? You're just on mute there, Caroline. Well done. Thank you. There are a few questions have come in. What time we know? We have a few minutes for questions as well. So let me see. Caroline, just a question or query there, just to reiterate about the area that is where bales are stored, just to confirm, you know, if people are storing bales in a portion of a field, or as opposed to a yard if you want, but just that bales where they're stored in a field and how that affects.
Basically where bales are stored, they are a feature, you know, they're taking up grassland, therefore it has to be excluded.
That's fine, very straightforward. Thanks very much, Caroline. Paul, a question there that's come in as well, and I suppose it's really cropped up in the last year or two. It affected last year too, but can you just confirm about the use of, I know, particularly donkeys in this part of the world for ANC or disadvantage payment, and maybe how that has changed over the last couple of years?
Yeah, so I suppose up to 2019, donkeys were as acceptable as bovines and ovines. There was no issue with them. From 2020, and this year they can only be used to calculate the stocking requirements for 50% of your land base. So if you traditionally need 6 livestock units, for example, you can have 3 donkeys, we'll give you 3 livestock units, but you need to make up the other 3 livestock units with sheep, goats, horses, or cattle. And in order for them to qualify, they have to be chipped, they have to have a passport in your name, and you have to send the original passport down anytime after the 1st of August, and send it by registered post, and the department will post it back by registered post to you. Yeah,
that's perfect. Thanks, Paul. That's a good comprehensive answer on that one. Just while we're on that, there's a question here has come in about, it's about lambs qualifying for ANC. But do you want to just comment on where the sheep figures are taken from for that qualifying figure, or the numbers?
Yeah, so the sheep, for the sheep farmers out there, you're all familiar with the different categories of ovines that are on your sheep census. The lambs won't qualify in the calendar year that they were born, but come the 1st of January the following year, they are now hoggets and they will qualify for the stocking density calculation. But as I said, they're not, while they're lambs, they don't qualify.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. Thanks, Paul. Coming back to you, Caroline, there again, and a question that you mentioned this a couple of times over your presentation is about whether or not you need permission to control scrub on SAC is the question here, but designated lands. You might just comment on that briefly.
Yeah, the answer is yes, you do need permission. You need to consult your MPWS ranger before you do anything to SAC or SPA or nature land. I wouldn't touch anything without chatting to a ranger first.
That's great. Thanks, Caroline. There's just so something has come in now, and I'll just comment briefly on it myself here. There's a question about stacking branches and trees and the likes of that. Can I burn? And very obviously, the restrictions on burning apply across the board from certain times of the year, as Caroline has outlined already. But most of that is controlled by the local council, so you should certainly speak to at least your local advisor before you make any decision on burning. Cut branches, bushes, anything like that. Just to talk to somebody who certainly would know what the rules are locally. Another question there, Paul, is can you not access the National Reserve at all if your income is over 40,000 euros?
No, if your taxable income is over 40,000 euros, you're not eligible for the National Reserve. You may still be eligible for the Young Farmers Top Up, but not for the National Reserve. 40,000 since 2016, I think, has been the cutoff for all farm income.
Yep, that's fairly definitive. Thanks, Paul. Another question here has come up a couple of times just about older photographs. I'm assuming is really the issue here, is where people get their maps out and it's showing bits of scrub or waste ground that have now been cleared. Maybe, Caroline, do you just want to how should that be dealt with on an application where it's marked as scrub but it's not scrub anymore? Just you need to go into detail, but just outline basically what somebody needs to do.
So basically, the first thing you do is tell your advisor or consultant and show them on the map what has changed. And if it's no longer scrub, they will mark it and tell the department on the notes that there's no longer scrub there and that the land is now eligible. But you must tell your advisor. They can't guess it without you telling them. Yeah.
That's perfect. That's perfect. And just a couple of questions there that I'll put to either you there, whichever you want to. There's a question there on, is it still permissible at the moment to let animals drink out of a stream as it stands? This person said they're not on the mains and that they don't have, let's say running water on the land as such. Can they still use the water courses on the farm?
Yeah, we'll fight over this one, Carolyn. At the moment, your best bet, all of this going forward is going to be linked to the nitrogen produced by your livestock, your stock and rate. And for individual cases, your best bet is to talk to your Teagasc advisor or consultant, or indeed if you go onto AgFood online yourself, you can see your nitrates figure and that will let you know what category you're in and whether watering from water courses is prohibited or not for you, or whether it's going to be in the future.
Okay, that's great. A couple of more, just quick ones there. A query on the use of an orchard for, I assume, for grazing disadvantage, whatever the case is that allowed, or what defines an orchard as being eligible or not eligible?
That's a good question. I would imagine now, I'm not 100% sure, but I would imagine that orchard that the grazing area would be eligible and it'd only be the trees that would be deducted, but maybe you should consult your advisor just to be double sure on that.
Yeah, I think that's a safe enough answer. I think if it's utilizable as grass and is utilized as grass, I don't see a big issue with it.
No.
You know, providing it's usable and not being they're not excluded from it for any particular reason. Just one last question, then, Paul. We'll put this to you. Is a question about the recent requirement for geotagged photos. Is maybe, you know, where somebody is asked to send in pictures. Is what's the requirement, or what are geotagged photos? Maybe you just might mention that.
Well, basically, it's something, whether we like it or not. It's the future, and it's going to be linked to a lot of our BPS applications going forward. It's a very quick way of proving land eligibility if you have the technology, and if you're competent enough to use the technology, or you have access to someone who has that competence. The department are at the minute, they're developing a program called AgriSnap, and that will probably be rolled out next year. It's quite simple. The satellite says there's scrub in the corner of that field. You say the scrub is removed. You go out with your smartphone with AgriSnap on it. You take a picture, you upload it onto AgriSnap. The department have it there, and then definitive proof. They have your GPS coordinates and the direction that you're taking the photograph. You can argue that it's a little bit scary, but anyway, at the end of the day, if it releases your single farm payment or area natural constraint payment quicker than it would otherwise, it's the way of the future.
That's great, Paul. That's great. Thanks a million. We're just 9 o'clock, so I'm going to start to wrap things up. I'd like to thank, we had a great crowd on tonight. I'd like to thank everybody for joining us. Next week, we move to one of the most important tasks carried out on the farm every year, and that is preparing your silage, preparing to grow your silage crop. So again, a very important topic next week, same as this week. And we'd love if you could join us again. And remember, you can always get full details of these webinars and everything else by following Teagasc SLD, Sligo, Leitrim, Donegal on social media, Twitter, Facebook and Instagram and so on. And you can also pick up all these webinars and other videos on the Teagasc SLD YouTube channel. That's it for this evening. Thanks to Paul and Caroline for the presentations. Thanks to all of you for joining us. Stay safe and good night.
Thank you.